The original title of the presentation was Science Knows No Gender, but after doing even more research, I would like to add a question mark, if you get my drift. But what I'd like to do is tell you about the ecology of how Eunice Foote went from a farmer's daughter to one of the greats in the science of climate change. First of all, she had mentors. The man in the middle, Amos Eaton, was serving a life sentence in the penitentiary in New York, which was located in Greenwich Village. When he showed his aptitude for science, much more, I think, liberal than today, they released him, and he was convicted of fraud, and they allowed him to go free, and he decided he would never again be a lawyer, but he would become John the Baptist of science. So he was sort of like an itinerant, where he would do a lecture here, a lecture there, and suddenly he attracted a great amount of fame. So he founded a school called Rensselaer, which some of you might know. It's a very famous technical school in Troy, New York. And he founded it on an idea which was totally radical, that students should learn by doing. He also believed in a very radical idea that women could do science. So combining those two, he attracted the woman on the left, who was also innovator in education for women. She was the principal of the Troy Female Seminary, where she believed women should not just revolve around their men, but should be partners. And so therefore they had to learn more than just sewing and singing. So Amos Eaton brought the women over from the Troy Female Seminary to lectures in science, believing that same-sex education was also a part of a bygone error, that and it was also an error, and that women and men should be educated together. But because these people were very hard, they were very individualistic, it was like mixing water with oil. But the other woman in the oval, as you see, was the sister of Emma Willard, who was the founder of the Troy Female Seminary. And she was about 7 years younger, and she just got so attracted to the idea of science through Amos Eaton that she began writing books on science and was introducing all of Amos Eaton's ideas into the Troy Female Seminary. So the reason I mention the Troy Female Seminary is this is the school that Eunice Foote attended. So what's really interesting in all the other articles or anything about Eunice Foote, they think somehow she came up from the fires like a phoenix and discovered her famous work. But in truth, she went to the Troy Female Seminary, which you see a picture of here, which, and this is a drawing of the chemistry laboratory where she broke her teeth on chemistry. Now you have to put yourself back into the period. In this period, the idea of a laboratory for students only was totally revolutionary. So the only 2 chemistry labs in the world just for students was at Amos Eaton School, the Rensselaer School, and at the Troy Female Seminary. So here they learned how to frame problems, how to do experiments, how to deal with the various elements of chemistry. In fact, the Ladies Magazine, 1834, wrote that the science offered at the Troy Female Seminary was equal to or better than any male school in the world. And here we see the curriculum. Once again, this is like my shovel, right? Just digging and digging in all these archives to understand who Eunice Foote was. And so we see the curriculum that she studied, and we see all the science courses required. In fact, the feminist, extremely famous feminist Elizabeth Cady Stanton stated that, and she attended the same school, that her parents considered the Troy Female Seminary as the Mecca for women, women's education. Now, another interesting thing about Eunice Foote, she seemed to be always at the right place at the right time. She was living right next door to Elizabeth Cady Stanton in Seneca Falls. And her husband studied the law under Elizabeth Cady Stanton's father. And so when the first Women's Rights Convention happened, this was in Seneca Falls, where she lived and was a neighbor to the leader of this convention. This was so radical. They had all these resolutions and sentiments that they mirrored from the Declaration of Independence, beginning with women and men are created equal. So for 2 days, Eunice Foote became inculcated in the ideas that women were as equal in all ways as men. And here we see her name affixed to the radical resolutions and sentiments. Boy, oh boy, when they got published, the male-dominated press was saying, women want to leave us at home and put on makeup to look cute for them when they came home. They wanted to basically become the lords of our manor. But what this brought on was convention after convention all over the United States for women's rights. One of the most important resolutions that most influenced the women who attended the convention and also who heard about it was the resolution that women should be allowed to enter all the professions that were then closed to them. And this is what I believe gave Eunice a real good, a real inspiration, which I hope my talks, my studies on Eunice Foote, my exhibits on Eunice Foote, my book on Eunice Foote will do, is to inspire women in science and also bring about the Me Too movement together with the climate change movement. Because, as you will see later, Eunice Foote has to be considered the mother of climate change. Now, what's really interesting about the story is you see interconnections, which are just amazing. First of all, the interconnection between women's rights and the development of Eunice Foote, science curriculum for both genders and the development of Eunice Foote. And also, if you see on the bottom, Eunice Foote was such a special person that she was selected as one of the 5 people to get the proceedings of this most radical convention published. And who was the publisher? Frederick Douglass, the greatest black person of the 19th century. And he believed that women's rights was part of the abolitionist movement. Because actually, you could beat a woman, you could beat your wife just like a slave, and it was okay back in the USA when America was great, right? So Eunice worked with Frederick Douglass, and here we see another very interesting interconnection with abolitionism and with feminism and with the science development of Eunice Foote. Now, this fascinates me that no one knows who this guy is. Joseph Henry, no one knows who he is. He was, in the first half of the 19th century, the #1 science person in America. He was also the first director of the Smithsonian. Now, the reason why I present him is because he wrote an article on the different reasons for climate, but it was all hypothetical. And Eunice Foote's husband, Elisha Foote, was a acolyte of Joseph Henry. So together, Eunice Foote and her husband, studied his papers, and also her husband was the Smithsonian meteorologist for Seneca Falls. And so suddenly, an idea flashed in Eunice Foote's mind, and here we see that Joseph Henry was the man who introduced Eunice Foote at the American Association for Advancement of Science. And one of the reasons why I believe my work should have now a question mark about science knows no gender, because all the men could, like myself right now, present. But if you were female, you had to have a man present your paper. And may I add too, that in the first 10 years of those meetings, there was only Eunice Foote and one other woman who ever was even allowed to have her paper read. So it's quite a amazing minority, right? Now, what you saw in Joseph Henry's paper on climate was what's called the hot box. It was invented in 1767 by Horace de Saussure, and what he discovered was he could take it all the way up to the Alps where you had freezing temperatures, and if you expose it to the sun, inside you get temperatures above boiling point. This became the modeling of the relationship between the atmosphere, being the glass cover, and the Earth being the bottom of the hot box, and glass is glass is transparent, to 98% of visible radiation. But when it goes into the box, it becomes heat, which the waves of heat are much larger, and they can't escape. And so this is actually the first rendering of the greenhouse effect. So this is what Eunice saw in Henry's paper. And this was actually, it changed generation to generation as how people saw this relationship between sun, earth, and atmosphere. But what Eunice did, and this is her revolutionary brain working, she decided to deconstruct the atmosphere into its various parts. And she focused on what was called carbonic acid. And the reason for this was basically the interest of the day. No one knew what CO2, carbon dioxide did when it was exposed to the atmosphere, But the reason why it was so interesting was it was called fixed air, because limestone contains CO2, but in rock form. But if you pour acid over it, the CO2 comes out. So this was the first gas that was discovered, and what I'm trying to show is what Eunice knew about CO2 when she did her experiments. And this is another shoveling where I found the lectures that were given at the Troy Female Seminary that Eunice attended. And you can read it yourself. I don't try to read things off that are in the English language on the screen. And so what the lecture was is carbonic acid, or CO2, was the first gas that introduced the whole chemistry of gas to academics. And then here we see Amos Eaton's chemical instructor, which she also read. And if you look at the right part, the part that has a signature, you'll see that this is owned by somebody from the Troy Female Seminary. He dedicated the book to the instructor of her husband, Elisha, and to the instructor of Eunice. So they both came from these very active science schools that taught science as doing, and were the first people to teach chemistry in that way. And then on the right side, you'll see what people thought of carbon dioxide. And one of the interesting parts that you see is that carbon dioxide, as it says in the 19th century English, has an affinity for oxygen. So this doesn't sound very good, because the more carbon you burn, the less oxygen you'll have, because the carbon, as it goes up in the air, affixes itself to O2. So at least in my experience, it's very good to have O2 to breathe. But this is what I'm trying to show, I hope I'm doing it, what people knew then, especially what Eunice knew then, as she began her experiments. And here we have, by Amos Eaton's acolyte, this sister of the founder of the Troy Female Seminary. She wrote a book on chemistry, and how she was talking about how it's always in the air. So I hope I'm bringing this to you, is what was going around in Eunice Foote's mind, what she was reading, when she deconstructed both the conditions of the atmosphere and also the gases of the atmosphere. This is totally revolutionary, brilliant. And then she put it to the test. And this is the cover of her report. And in her report, read it very carefully, because this is the first brick of modern climate change science. If you can see here, the hottest gas she found was carbonic acid, which was the old term for carbon dioxide. So she discovered for the first time that carbon dioxide emitted a lot of heat, kept in a lot of heat. And also even more, I think, profound is the second line, where she, which I have highlighted, which I think you really should understand, is basically the basis of global warming today, where she writes that basically if more carbonic acid, or CO2, is added to the atmosphere, the Earth will become hotter. This is 162 years ago. So what was the reaction to her contemporaries, to this report? Well, first of all, I'd really like you to pay attention to this Scientific American article, because it's very profound, and it basically sums up the whole story is what's highlighted is one, that almost every male scientist had this, what they called it, a mean notion that women are not capable of doing science. And they said Eunice Foote and her amazing experiments proves how wrong they are. Because A, it showed in several ways male speculation that was just speculation, but Eunice Foote, through empirical research, came up with better conclusions. And the most important conclusion was, the question was, why was the Earth hotter in, and I'll try to explain because some people don't know the great ages of the Earth. The Devonian times was about 400 million years ago, 480 million years ago. It was called the Age of Fish. It was also called the greenhouse period, when the Earth was very warm. There were no large plants. The Earth was primarily rock. And then there was the Carboniferous period, which was called the Age of Plants, which succeeded the Devonian. And that's where a majority of the coal was formed that sequestered all the carbon. So males had said that there was this plutonium effect, that as time went by, the Earth inside was getting cooler. But they said, as you can read from this article, that Eunice Foote presented a much better idea, that in Devonian times, there was far more carbon dioxide in the air than in the later Carboniferous, which is validated in today's science. Now, this is an amazing idea, because what people were doing was generalizing from her experiment. And this is how science works. Like, for example, Einstein. So many things that Einstein could never have even dreamt of are based on his discoveries. And Eunice Foote, the same thing. There was so much out there that stimulated the mind that made her ideas so relevant. So Scientific American ended, if you look at the bottom, said basically that this great woman afforded the evidence that women can create, can discover. They don't have to be relegated to just reading science. They can be doing science. They have the same capabilities. And the reason why we say this, the article states, is because of Eunice Foote's groundbreaking work. Now, another very interesting result from her work was that Joseph Henry, who I already mentioned, who actually was a strong supporter of fossil fuels. He thought it was God-given. But then he thought, and considered Eunice's experiments, and he said that there are some limits to how much carbon dioxide can be put in the air without causing basically mass extinctions. And imagine, this is in 1859. And this is actually what's happening today. We have this term called the Anthropocene period, where man or humans become dominant, and there are no animals. The animals become totally irrelevant. And this is predicted because of Eunice's work by Joseph Henry. So what I try to tell people is another very important part of this research is to show people the deep roots, the American roots of climate change. And it was all due to Eunice Foote, all due, like I said, to the mother of climate science. And I hope, if nothing else in my talk, you'll come away with, the notion and the true belief that it was Eunice Foote who basically laid the first brick. And yet, her name is unknown. And why is this? Because everybody believes another person discovered these ideas. A scientist named John Tyndall. Now, I had a very interesting experience, because if you read that, he basically says that there's nothing written on these ideas. There's nothing written on the notion that carbon dioxide or carbonic acid would change the atmosphere. But through my work, I'm the father of climate change, right? So this got me asking a big question. So who's right? And so I began to, but also remember, this was published like 5 years after Eunice Foote. So I think one thing we can all agree upon is that Eunice Foote had priority. Now, why did he omit her? Well, this was an interesting experience, it's a true experience. The Smithsonian had some letters from Eunice Foote that I wanted, so I sort of, the way I am, I just sort of talk, and I told about Eunice Foote's situation where no one knew her name, and that Tyndall took all the credit. And the woman who actually edited volume 11 of the Joseph Henry paper said, "Oh, that's just like Tyndall. He's the great omitter." And then she went on. See, she was the editor for the period when Tyndall was in America. Joseph Henry threw this big dinner for Tyndall. You think he would appreciate it and at least, be a pleasant guest, polite guest. And Joseph Henry at that dinner presented all his ideas on sound, the science of sound. 4 years later, Tyndall writes this paper that since 1708, nobody has ever studied any ideas of sound, omitting all the work of Joseph Henry. And the reason was he didn't like Joseph Henry's work. But you don't do that in science. What you do is you try to show all the basic steps and why your ideas are better. But you don't leave out people just because you don't like what they say. So that's one hypothesis was, you have to understand, Tyndall was a great misogynist. He believed that women could read what the great male savants write, but they could never create like the great male savants like himself. Now, this set me exploring all over the world where Eunice Foote was published. And so I said, oh my God, she's published in 1857 in Edinburgh, not too far from London, in one of the 3 great science journals of the UK. So obviously, Tyndall probably saw her work there. If you can look at the bottom, where it expresses all her ideas. But again, because of Tyndall's sexism, because of his belief that women can't do science, he saw something that was, I guess, really bothered his mind, because as you see, there's a Mrs. there, right? Do you see that? And then she was also published in Germany, And Tyndall attended and did his PhD work in Germany. And so he was the conduit of all German science to the UK. Now, in the Jahrbuch, which is the yearbook for all discoveries in 1856, was again Eunice Foote. She has a foot, right? She's walking everywhere. Her papers are walking everywhere. And to show you that science does know gender, even though she had a very female name, they called her Harefoot. But I thought, oh, well, this is where Tyndall probably saw her work. But as I learned from police work, you should look closer to home for the crime. And what happened was at 4 o'clock in the morning, about 3 weeks ago, I remembered that Tyndall's journal, the journal he was one of the editors in the UK, which was called the Philosophical Magazine. It was the #1 science magazine in the world at the time. He had reprinted Eunice Foote's husband's article from, and this is where I'll become the prosecutor, this journal here called the American Journal of Science. And in it, and you can see it, I see it after my lecture too, right after Eunice Foote's husband's work, which was seen obviously by Tyndall's fellow editors, comes Eunice's work. So you couldn't have missed it. And if you come up, I'll show you it. There's no sleight of hand. So, and then also what makes it even crazier, and I discovered this last night, was that Tyndall actually had an article published in this same issue where Eunice's work was. And so we see very closely the work of Eunice Foote in the work of Tyndall, but she's not even mentioned. But to give Tyndall credit, and because I want to be really fair, and I don't want to at all be dogmatic, because I think we can credit Tyndall because he had a much better laboratory than Eunice had. He was more precise in his measurements of what Eunice came up with. So the question is, and I'll leave you with this, is did he omit her because of his nasty views towards women? Did he not publish her, reprint her article, which was right next to her husband's, because he wanted to claim this as his own? As some colleagues said, my research has made Tyndall's work somewhat cloudy. This is from a magazine, actually a newspaper called The Revolution. It was the work of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. I think all of you know who those people are. They came down to Washington, they said, to visit Judge Foote and his scientific wife. Because at the time, Judge Foote was the head of the patent office in the US. And so as they talked to Eunice, she said this, if you can see it highlighted, it's probably the most amazing statement, sums up my whole talk. If you want me to read it, I'll read it, but if you can read it. It says it all. So what I'd like to leave you with, there are three great people in the 19th century in the development of climate change science. One is Eunice Foote, who started it all, but also there were antecedents, but who actually broke up the atmosphere, as I said, into the various states and gases. But her work leaves question because it wasn't as precise as we would have liked it to be. And Tyndall, who adds that precision. And then Sponte Arrhenius, who even goes farther, because Tyndall focused on water vapor. And Sponte Arrhenius, a Swede, decided he would look at the other agent of climate change gas, and that was carbon dioxide or carbonic acid. So I think what's really fair is to give Eunice Foote, the forgotten woman, her due, and that's what I hope to launch at this meeting today, is to have, like, rather than the Tyndall Center of Atmospheric Science, probably have the Foote-Tyndall Center of Atmospheric Science, for example. And to have her as the inspiration for women who want to go into science but feel somehow afraid. I mean, remember, it was only 7 years ago that Larry Summers, the head of Harvard, said that women were not genetically fit to do science. And remember, it was only last year that the people at this engineer at Google said the reason why there are no women in tech is because they don't have the genetic abilities. So this is not an issue that's gone by. And then connect with the idea of climate change and have Eunice as the rallying point, because she is one of the great scientists who discovered the two basic ideas of climate change science, which I bear repeating. One is that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It's not some silly little gas that, or a Chinese hoax, or something Al Gore wants to do because he has nothing else to do in his life. So, so I look at this as merging, both inspiring 50% of Americans to do what Eunice did. And thank you for attending, and I'd love to answer questions if you'd like to.